I am on a mission today. Reformation just came up with this holiday collection and they have a glorious amount of velvet dresses that I am going to attempt to create in today's video. So I'm gonna go into the Salvation Army and fingers crossed that I can find some velvet pieces to thrift. Hi guys, my name is Tiffany and welcome back to Upcycled by Tito, where I take old forgotten items and give them a new life. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I am obsessed with all of the velvet dresses from Reformation, like this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and also this one. I love them all, so I thought I would try to recreate some of them. My plan is to recreate 6 of their dresses before the end of the year, and now that I'm thinking about it, it does seem a little overwhelming, but in this video, I'm gonna show you how I turned these thrifted pants into this dress, and also this thrifted dress into this Reformation-inspired dress. Since I've got so many dresses to get through, let's get right to this tutorial. The first dress I'm going to be recreating is the Jocelyn dress. The moment I saw it, I just knew I wanted to recreate it because it's just so beautiful and romantic, and I thought it would be perfect for the holidays. So let's take a quick look at the details. This dress retails for $298 and features a square neckline. It also has a relaxed skirt with a side slit on the left side. My favorite part about this dress is this lace-up detail in the back, and it also has oversized sleeves. Initially, I was going to draft my own pattern, but I just found out that Mood Fabrics has so many free sewing patterns available online, and I came across this pattern, which I'm gonna link in the description box below. It is actually really similar to the Reformation Jocelyn dress, so I'm gonna be using this free resource because free is my favorite flavor. All you have to do is submit your email on the website and they'll send you a printable version of the pattern. Here are all the pages printed and laid out, overtaking my entire table. And also, it is the loveliest, most beautiful winter's day, and it's put me in such a festive mood. So I put on my best Christmas sweater, channeled my inner elf, and got to work taping the pattern pieces together. This took a little bit of time, but everything was clearly marked and it was pretty straightforward. As you can see here, I've taped and cut out all of the pattern pieces. Based on my measurements, I'll be using the size 4 pattern as a guide, and I'm going to show you exactly how I modified this pattern to make the Reformation Jocelyn dress, starting with the top. This is the center front pattern. The first thing I'm going to do is draw a waistline. Based on this pattern, this is the center fold line, and this section to the right of it is meant to be folded under to create the buttonhole placket. If I were to cut this on fold, the original neckline will only come up to this point. To make this dress more like the Jocelyn dress, I'm extending the neckline and shifting the center fold line to this point. Now using some parchment paper, I copy out the pattern, making sure I'm copying the size 4 pattern and the new center fold line. Then I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance to all of the sides except for the center fold and cut out my pattern. Because I added about 3/4 of an inch to the center front pattern, I'm going to have to modify this curved part of the side front pattern piece. Using the size 4 pattern as a guide, I measure and mark at 3/4 of an inch. Whoops, I definitely messed up and was measuring from the size 2 pattern, so let's try this again. Once again, I'm tracing the pattern onto some parchment paper, following the size 4 pattern and tracing this modified curved edge. I add a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around and then cut out my new side front pattern. For the side back piece, we're just going to make sure that the shoulder seams match by shifting this curved edge over 3/4 of an inch. Just like the side front piece, I'm measuring and marking 3/4 of an inch from the size 4 pattern guide. Trace out the pattern, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and then cut. Now that we have the pattern pieces for the bodice, let's take a quick look at the velvet pants. As you can see, these pants are pretty big on me and they're made out of a pretty stretchy velvet. Whoever donated them must have been getting rid of their velvet pant collection because I found multiple pairs of these and I'll be using 2 to recreate the Jocelyn dress. Here is the game plan. From one of the pant legs, I'm going to cut out all of the pieces for the bodice. From the other pant leg, I'll cut out the pieces I need for the sleeves. From the second pair of pants, I'll cut out the front skirt piece that will be made out of 3 pieces from one pant leg and the back, which will be made out of 2 pieces from the remaining pant leg. I'll be using 1.5 inch wide ribbon to lace up the back of the dress. I've gone ahead and cut out my bodice pieces, and this is what it should look like. I just finished sewing the top together and I completely forgot to take into account that this velvet is really stretchy. So I'm not sure if you can see, but this front panel is really big and it's draping a little, and I don't really want it to do that. I want it to lay nice and flat. So I'm just going to seam rip this, and then I'm going to take in the center front panel about an inch on either side and then put it back together, and hopefully that fits a little better. Using my rotary cutter, I took off an inch on either side of the center front panel, then pinned and sewed the pieces back together. I can only assume that Daisy decided to come by and say hi because she knows how much I hate seam ripping. I'm so much happier with the way this fits me now. I'm gonna go ahead and cut out the exact same pieces for the lining, and I'm gonna be using fabric from this dress that I thrifted for also $1. I've just finished sewing the lining pieces together, and before I attach that to the velvet piece, I'm gonna go ahead and make those loops for the ribbon in the back. As you can see here, on the original dress, the loops for the ribbon are made out of thread, and I really don't like the way that looks. So I'll be using some single fold bias tape to make essentially what will look like belt loops for the ribbon instead. As you can see here, I've sewn the 6 belt loops out of 2-inch strips of bias tape to the right side of the lining. Then I pin the lining to the velvet right sides facing, and I'll sew them together. I just finished sewing those 2 pieces together, and I don't know if you can see, but I also top stitched the lining to the velvet just so that everything is nice and neat and the lining doesn't peek out when I wear the garment. Now that we're done with this, let's move on to the sleeves. Using the pattern as a guide, I cut out my sleeve to the length of 15 inches. Because I want it to be gathered at the top, I'll sew a basting stitch from here to here. Then I'll also sew the sleeve together along this side. I've sewn on my basting stitch, making sure I use the longest stitch length on my machine and that I didn't back stitch at the end. I've also sewn the sides together, and now I'm gonna go ahead and hem the sleeve before I attach it to my garment. So I'm just folding the hem over about 3/4 of an inch, and I'm gonna secure with a straight stitch, but I'm not going to sew all the way around. I'm gonna be leaving a 1-inch hole so that I can insert the elastic. Using a safety pin, I'm just gonna go ahead and feed the elastic through the casing. Now I'm just going to overlap these 2 ends and secure with a zigzag stitch. Now I'm just going to use a straight stitch to sew up this hole. To attach the sleeve to my top, I'm going to match up the seam from the sleeve to the side seam of the top and pin them together right sides facing. I'm gonna continue to pin the top to the sleeve until the point where I want the gathers to start. Now I'm gonna gather the top of the sleeve until it matches the length of the armhole and then pin to secure. Now I'm gonna sew with a straight stitch to secure. Once your sleeve is sewn on, repeat all these steps for the other sleeve. Now that I'm done sewing the top, I'm gonna go ahead and attach the ribbon in the back so that I can try it on and see if I need to make any adjustments. I'm honestly so happy with the way this fits me, but remember earlier how I gave myself all these additional steps and tried to make the loops for the ribbon on the inside so I could hide them? Well, turns out they still want to peek out. So as much as I don't like the look of the thread loops, I'm gonna go ahead and do that because this is way worse. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and make the thread loops and then seam rip these belt loop things that I made. To make the thread loops, I'll be using this cotton cording. I've made a knot at the end of this strand, and with my needle, I thread it through the seam that joins the velvet and the lining. Then I sew down about 2 inches above the first stitch. I tie a knot to secure, and you should have a loop that looks like this. Here are the pieces I cut out for the front of the skirt. I didn't follow the pattern because I didn't have enough fabric, but I cut it to a length of 32 inches, and I made sure each panel was the same width as its corresponding bodice panel so that all the seams would line up nicely. I'll sew this seam all the way to the hem, but I'll only sew this seam to this point to create the slit. With my last remaining pant leg, I draft the back of the skirt. Trying to leave the largest portion of fabric possible, I cut a diagonal line with my rotary cutter. Now I'm just measuring and marking at 32 inches on both sides of this panel. Then I mark the waistline with some pins and curve this end up slightly when I cut. Now I measure and mark the hemline and cut with my rotary cutter. Place this piece on the other panel and pin to secure. Cut out the second piece and you should have 2 mirrored pieces. Sew the 2 pieces together and then sew to the front of the skirt. I've just finished sewing all the skirt pieces together, so now it's time to attach it to the top. So I'm gonna pin the top to the skirt, making sure that all of the seams in the front and the side line up, but I'm gonna pin it so that the seam allowance for the top is going to be as narrow as possible and the seam allowance for the skirt is going to be about 1 inch. I know this sounds like I'm just making things difficult for myself, but I promise this is gonna make sense later. I've just finished sewing the top and the skirt together, and as you can see, the seam allowance allowance for the skirt is significantly bigger than the seam allowance for the top. We're almost done, so let's move on. So the original dress has a zipper closure in the center back, but I'm gonna make my version elasticized in the back instead. I just wanted to make this dress a little more comfortable because I know I'm gonna be overeating this Christmas. This is the section in the back where the skirt is not attached to the top, and that's where I'm going to be inserting the elastic. I'm gonna sew a straight stitch from here to here on the 1-inch seam allowance to create a channel. I've sewn the straight stitch and I'll be using some 3/4 inch wide elastic. Using a safety pin, I thread the elastic through the channel. Now I'm going to secure this end of the elastic by sewing a straight stitch here. Now that this side is secure, I'm going to pull the elastic so the fabric gathers and trim the elastic to the length that I want. Sew with a straight stitch to secure. This is what it should look like now. Last step is to lace up the back. Here's a little reminder of what the velvet pants looked like before, and this is what my Reformation-inspired dress looks like now. I'm honestly so happy with the way this turned out, and I love the way the pink ribbon looks against the black velvet. I think it's pretty similar to the original Jocelyn dress, and I spent under $5 to make this. The second Reformation dress I'm going to be recreating is the Antoinette dress. So this dress is basically a longer version of the Christine dress, which I made a few months ago. The Antoinette dress retails for $278. It has a bustier style top with a ruffled edge and adjustable strap ties, just like the Christine dress. However, the Antoinette dress has a midi-length trumpet skirt with a ruffled hem. In this video that I posted a few months ago, I have a step-by-step tutorial on how I figured out the pattern for the top, so I'm gonna link that down below if you wanna check that out. I'm gonna be using the pattern I made for the Christine dress to make this Antoinette dress. This floor-length velvet dress was thrifted for me by my friend Ilda for $5. It's made out of a very stretchy velvet, and while it's big on me, I think I'll have just enough fabric for this upcycle. Here is the game plan. From the front of the top section, I'll cut out the pieces I need for the front bodice, and from the top of the back section, I'll cut out the pieces I need for the back bodice. From the front and back of the middle section, I'll cut out both my skirt pieces. I'll use the bottom of the dress to create the ruffled hem, and from whatever fabric that's left over, I'll make the ruffled edge for the top as well as the adjustable straps. Lastly, I'll add an invisible zipper to the left side of the dress. Here, I'm cutting out all of the bodice pattern pieces I need on some fusible interfacing. Since the velvet I'm using is so stretchy, this interfacing will provide the fabric a little more structure. I ironed the interfacing to the velvet and cut out all of my pieces. Here are the velvet pieces for the bodice cut out and ready to be sewn together. Before moving on to the skirt, I'm cutting two 1 1/4 inch strips from the hem of the original dress, and I'll be saving these to make the ruffle edge on the top later. Let's move on to the skirt. I start off by measuring the width of the waistline of the front of my top. Mine measures 14 inches. This means the width of the front waistband of my skirt needs to be 14.5 inches to account for seam allowance. Using a skirt I know fits me well as a guide, I copy the shape of the waistband and cut until the center point. I'm going to do the same for the side seam, but I'm going to let this part flare out. Since the material is quite stretchy, I don't have to be super precise. From the waistline, I measure and mark to 19 inches and then cut. Then, I measure to 7 1/4 inches on the waistline and mark with a pin. Using this center point as a guide, I fold the fabric in half and cut out the other side. Here is what the piece for the front of my skirt looks like. Moving on to the back of the skirt. This time, I measure the width of the waistline of the back of my top, and mine measures 13 inches. I'm adding 2 inches to that measurement because I will be adding 2 darts in the back of my skirt, so with the seam allowance, that total measurement is 15.5 inches. Using the front piece as a guide, I cut out one side of the hemline, side seam, and waistline. Now I measure to 8.5 inches and mark with a pin. Again, I use the center point as a guide, and I fold my fabric in half and cut out the rest of the back piece. Here is what the back skirt piece looks like, and this is where I'll sew the darts. I've sewn the darts, which measure 1 inch wide and 7 inches tall, making sure they line up with the seams in the back of my top. Then I place both skirt pieces right sides facing and sew together along the side seams. As you can see here, I've pinned the top to the skirt along the waistband. This side of the dress is sewn together, but this side is not because this is where I'll be inserting the invisible zipper. I've sewn the top to the skirt, and I've also inserted the invisible zipper on the left side. Now let's move on to the ruffled bottom part of the dress. From the bottom of the original dress, I've cut out 3 panels of fabric that are 10 inches wide, and the length is the original width of the dress. Now I'm going to sew all these pieces together. I've sewn those 3 pieces together and now I have this long circle tube thing. I've also gone ahead and hemmed the bottom so I don't have to do this later, and to create the gathers, I'm going to sew a basting stitch along the top, making sure that I use the longest stitch length available on my machine. I pin this ruffled hem to the hem of the skirt using every single pin I own, and then sew these 2 pieces together. I just finished sewing the ruffles on the bottom and I used the same steps to sew the ruffles for the top using that 1 1/4 inch strip that I cut earlier. With whatever fabric I had left over, I cut out a 2-inch strip of fabric. Then I fold it in half right side spacing and I'll sew along this long edge and on just one of these sides. I've turned my strap inside out and this is what it looks like now. I've also gone ahead and made 3 more and I pinned them to my top and I'm just going to secure it with a straight stitch. I'm actually pretty proud of this upcycle because this is all I have left from the original dress. I was a little concerned that I wasn't gonna have enough fabric at one point, but I did, so let's take a look at what the dress looks like now. Here is a closer look at what the top looks like. I really love this dress. It's a little bit classy and a whole lot of comfy. I'm so happy with how this turned out and I think it looks really similar to the Reformation Antoinette dress. Let me know how I did in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I haven't quite narrowed down the other Reformation dresses I'll be recreating, so if there is a specific velvet Reformation dress you want a tutorial for, let me know in the comments below. For more photos of the dresses that I made today, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Little Toe. If you liked this video, make sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. As always, thank you so much for watching.